George Ella Lyons tells where she's from this way. She writes, "I am from clothespins, from Clorox and carbon tetrachloride. I'm from the dirt under the back porch, black, glistening. It tasted like beets. I am from the forsythia bush, the Dutch elm whose long-gone limbs I remember as if they were my own. I'm from fudge and eyeglasses, from Imogene and Alifair. I'm from the know-it-alls and the pass-it-ons, from perk up and pipe down. I'm from He Restoreth My Soul, with a cotton ball lamb and 10 verses I can say myself. I'm from Artemis and Billy's Branch, fried corn and strong coffee, from the finger my grandfather lost to the auger, the eye my father shut to keep his sight. Under my bed was a dress box, spilling old pictures, a sift of lost faces to drift beneath my dreams. I am from those moments, snapped before I budded, leaf fall from the family tree." George Ella Lyons grew up in the mountains of Kentucky, surrounded by words just enough to learn to love them. Her mother sang and recited poetry while she did housework. And eventually, George Ella realized that words were her special calling. This poem has become a part of a movement of sorts. Teachers use it in writing exercises to make students think and to bridge the gaps between our differences, to discover our shared roots. Because where we're from isn't always a biological question, after all, as if our birthright or birth order or birth story offers some privilege of place in the history of things. Lord knows families come in all shapes and sizes, some biological, some adopted, some created through the careful choices made by those disillusioned by blood family. Even so, we are prone to soaking in what surrounds us, whether it's poetry and song, fried corn and strong coffee, toxic speech and tendencies, behaviors that shape who we become. If we understand better where we're from, maybe we'll know better or see better who we might be becoming. At the heart of the Jewish faith was a recitation of a story of belonging and becoming. Throughout Hebrew scripture, whenever God's people wandered, were in exile, took possession of another's land, suffered the loss of a mighty king, the story was meant to be told the same way. My ancestor was a wandering Aramean. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of slavery in Egypt. These were the words emblazoned on the hearts of the faithful, so that whenever they felt lost or uncertain or lost their way, not just literally, but sometimes when it was tempting to think too much of themselves in victory or too little of themselves in defeat, these were the words their God implored them to remember. I am the Lord your God, who brought you out of slavery in Egypt into the promised land. Remember who you are and whose you are, and find yourself back on track. Where are you from? Does it help in times when you have lost your way to remember? Genealogy is a big thing. You can run a swab across your cheek or spit in a cup and send it off in a mailer, and in a matter of weeks, you too can become a part of the growing database of those who are searching for where they're from. The best stories are the ones where someone unearths an ancestry long kept secret. I took one of those tests once. My husband bought it for my birthday to test whether, in fact, I had any Irish in me. My maiden name, now my middle name, is O'Connor for starters. My hair, which used to be dark and curly and is now just curly, let's not talk about the color, and my fair skin all seem to be adequate indicators, to say nothing of temperament, which we will also not discuss. The kit was sent off and came back with less Irish than I would have liked. But friends who are scientists have told us that some of these tests actually trace better through the maternal line than the paternal. So it turns out you can't always trust the test. Sometimes it's not the DNA that tells the full story, but other characteristics and traits that can only come from, well, wherever it is that you're from. Matthew, the gospel writer, begins his story of Jesus' life with a genealogy. tracing his ancestry all the way back to Abraham. He's making the case that a wandering Aramean really was Jesus' ancestor, if we are to believe this careful, somewhat dry list of begets. Matthew is giving Jesus some real credibility here, not just as God's Son, the divine one sent from heaven, but as one who's fully human and rooted in the history and story of God's people. Jesus will carry with him traits of his literal parentage, a compassion beyond human limitation, a grace like none other. But he'll also have those elements that place him as one adopted into the line of Joseph, of the house of David. Matthew wants us to know where Jesus is from so we can better understand where he's going and what he's all about. The genealogy sets Jesus in a context. It's not just about the names that are listed, but the stories they evoke, the images and memories of moments of courage and struggle, defeat and triumph. I think it would be an interesting writing project to take Matthew's genealogy and replace the names with something of their story or of their character. Where is Jesus from? He's from, go from your land to a land I'm about to show you. He's from, your descendants will be as numerous as the stars. He's from wrestling a shadow at daybreak. He's from breaking your promise to your kin or your covenant with your God. He's from the king who built the temple and the king who let it fall. He's from a dream that told me, don't be afraid. And he's from, let it be to me according to thy word. Matthew traces a careful path not only through the generations, but through the human experience of faith, from exile and doubt to the high places and times of worship. Jesus comes to us with credentials as God's Son and calls us his own. Throughout his life, he will heal and teach and restore all manner of people, those considered unclean, those considered on the outside. He'll bring them into his family tree by naming them too as sons and daughters of Abraham. Do you know where you're from? When you're feeling lost or alone or left out, does it help sometimes? Would it help to remember or to be reminded? I didn't need to send in my DNA kit. I know a good bit of the family story already, thanks to others interested in preserving these stories. But some of the stories are less about place and blood heritage than they are about character. I don't think my family tree has any noble branches or secrets enough to shake the foundations. We're more kind of run-of-the-mill on both sides of the equation. My maternal grandparents grew up right next door to each other. It was my great-aunt, my grandma's sister, who told me stories of my great-great-grandfather who lived next door to them, a little wiry man, sneaky, she said, with what they used to call senility. He'd managed to escape the house every now and again, and she, as a young girl, would be sent to go look for him, finding him out in the cornfields and bringing him home. I know that my great-great-grandmother died by suicide. The newspaper clipping from the early 1900s records the sentiments of that day. No one knows what could make a Christian woman consider such an act. Her daughter-in-law had died, leaving 3 young girls, including my grandmother, for the family to raise. There were so many that she had to care for. I wonder if she had lived in a time when mental health was more of a priority, would her family have recognized the signs of deep depression, the complications of her grief? Would her community have better understood that it wasn't an abandonment of her faith? Would they have been more gracious? I don't know about you, but where I'm from is a whole lot of people and life situations, and most of them as ordinary as the hills, some of whose secrets I know or think I know, but many I do not. So maybe the most extraordinary thing about Matthew's genealogy is that he doesn't hold back on some of the family secrets. Because if he wanted to, he could have painted Jesus' story with only the best colors and the best scenes. But if you were listening, you'd be quick to notice Jesus' ancestor might have been a wandering Aramean, but like most of us, Jesus had a family. He had a family with all its quirks and characters and skeletons and flaws. Matthew does what most in his time would not have done. He includes the names of women, and not just any women. Tamar, Rahab, the wife of Uriah, you'll remember her name, Bathsheba, and Ruth. And while many have been quick over the years to assign the sorrow of their stories solely to their names, Tamar, the abused one, Rahab, the prostitute, the wife of Uriah seduced by a king, these are not the stories just of individuals. They're the stories of families and communities. Tamar, whose very life was of little value to her own father, is remembered in Jesus' family story. Rahab, who made a living in a way too few are willing to discuss, but too many are willing to perpetuate. Her sharp wit and quick thinking save a whole people from destruction. That's what we're meant to recall. The wife of Uriah, whose story is not just her own, but that of a king, both venerated by history and faith story, but in so many ways a broken man. These two are a part of Jesus' family story. These are the places Jesus is from, where grace is found, and we know the truth about who he is and who we are. So a lot of us are emerging from time with family these past weeks, some more than others. I won't ask for a show of hands, but I'm guessing there'd be a few lifted up in truth if I asked if any of you found yourselves looking around your family gatherings this year wondering, really? This is where I'm from. I'm guessing there are more than a few of you, of us, who wonder about our place in the world, who question where we belong. Matthew's genealogy sets up Jesus' credibility as a descendant of Abraham and assures us in startling ways that we have a place in the story of God's grace as well. Where are you from? Your ancestor was a wandering Aramean, the recipient of a great promise even he couldn't quite believe. Your great-great-great-great-great-grandmother was many things, but in the moment it counted most, she stood with her God. One, if not more, of your grandfathers was a total schmuck, a real jerk who sent his wife and children ahead of him when it came time to confront his enemy. And even he, weak-hearted as he was someone God depended on. Your grandmother in faith was an unwed teenager who gave birth in a barn. And the stars were never brighter than they were on that night long ago. You are a son of Abraham, a daughter of Abraham, who may be made to think you don't yet know who you are. But God knows who you are and whose you are, and will never, ever forget. Thanks be to God.